Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, before I begin, I'm Ed Staffman, House District 62, downtown and historic Bozeman, backing up south to the Gallatin Range. Proud to be able to present to you today House Bill 335, and I do have a handout if I might distribute them, Mr. Chair.
After you spell your last name?
S-T-A-F, like in Frank, M-A-N.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, House Bill 335 and members of the committee would abolish the death penalty in Montana. It is the same bill that has been introduced in past sessions, except for the whereas clauses on the first 4 pages. So I'm not going to walk you through page 5 through the end of the lengthy bill, except to say that, in summary, what it does is it eliminates every reference to the death penalty and replaces it with life in prison without the possibility of parole. The whereas clauses, which I'll spend my few minutes on introducing the bill, set out the reasons why this is so important. First reason being the possibility of innocence. There are now 185 exonerees of death row inmates around the country, one of whom is from the state of Montana, and that is documented in your handout. There's also what we could call generally the issue of moral and religious opposition. There are some petitions and so on from Montana clergy and out-of-state clergy as well in the handout, and we'll hear a testimony on that. There's the idea of government overreach, that if we don't trust the government to do so many of the things that we're not happy with the government do we trust them to make decisions on life and death? There's issues about arbitrariness and how it's in practice not applied in a fair and a rational method. There's materials on families and how so many of the families of victims oppose the death penalty. There's materials on process, on why the death penalty is so expensive because of the extensive preparation that has to be done. There's materials from prosecutors and judges who oppose the death penalty. There's materials on the impact on others within the system, like the lawyers and the judges and the corrections officers. And finally, we're going to hear about the costs. And you're going to hear that the cost of taking one death penalty to trial is about $2.1 million, and that's just to trial. After trial, if in fact there is a conviction, then there are appeals, post-conviction, and all sorts of other things. And it's important when we consider the cost to realize that many cases start off as a death penalty case, but end up dropped or dismissed as a death penalty case somewhere along the way. And so it's not just the cases that end up going to trial as a death penalty case, but the many more that are prepared that way and then have to be dropped. And so you'll hear some information not on the actual cost in Montana. In the whereas clauses, I've set out the studies from various states, which show that 14 states have conducted studies on this and show that somewhere between $500,000 and as much as $10 million per case more it costs to bring a death penalty case than it does a non-death penalty case for homicide. So those are some of the issues that we'll be discussing in the next the rest of this morning. And with that, I will sit and let the witnesses offer their testimony and reserve the right to close. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the committee, for the hearing. Good hearing. I also meant at the start to thank Representatives Hopkins and Grief and Abbott, who are co-sponsors of this bill with me. This is a big topic, obviously, and there are many aspects of it. So in the limited time, I just want to touch on some of them. So the first is the problem of innocence. This committee felt strongly, I think unanimously, passed a bill that came out of an interim committee that provided for relief for those wrongfully convicted. There's one class of person, however, that was not included in that, and that's the one who's been executed. I have myself sat on death row with innocent people who've subsequently been exonerated. In my career as a lawyer, my first career, I was involved in probably a couple of hundred death penalty cases, and I had a half a dozen or so where that resulted in an exoneration after people were on death row. And I was involved in many others that looked like one of these horrible crimes when the police made the arrest, and only by a fate did something come up to say, you know what, this is not what we thought it was. I can think of one case in particular where a woman was thought to have killed a baby, and it looked like she did it when the police made the arrest. But as it turned out, this baby had a very rare disease that was discovered by an expert pathologist that nobody else had caught. And when that was identified, all of a sudden, all the facts started to line up, and her original story turned out to be true. So these heinous crimes that you want to reserve it for, they may be heinous, but they may not be the person who did it. I could go on with story after story of people who've been exonerated, people who it looked like they were guilty, but something showed along the way that they weren't. We have in your packet a testimony of one individual, and we had hoped to bring, but there wasn't an opportunity to bring other exonerees, people who spent years on death row or in different states, to tell what it's like to be on death row when you're innocent. The second issue I want to bring is is the arbitrariness of this. Now, the data is clear. Over time, scientists, social scientists like Professor Radlett have been able to look at this issue, and it may seem like we reserve this for the harshest of crimes, but in fact we don't. And in fact, the way it works in practice is it's the luck of the draw. I can tell you just one case where 3 defendants had committed a crime. It was a very bad crime, and there was little question they did it. They were all assigned attorneys off of a list, and which attorney got which client was a function of what the letter your last name began with. I got one of them. My client was offered a plea to 30 years if he'd testify against the others, which he took. And when I asked the prosecutor after, why did you offer my client the plea, he told me because I'm a pain, and he wanted me off the case. The only reason that that my client got one sentence and the others got a different sentence was because the prosecutor thought that the lawyer assigned to my client was a pain. And why did I have that client? Because my last name started with S, and that's how the alphabetized list worked. In your packet, you'll find letters from former prosecutors, former assistant attorney general in Montana, former Supreme Court justice of Montana, law enforcement. You know, if you want to help law enforcement, there's a way to do it. Take the millions and millions of dollars that we're now pouring down the drain and put it to law enforcement. Give them more law enforcement officers. I've calculated that there was enough money wasted in the last decade that we could probably have hired 2 more deputy sheriffs in every county in Montana. We could have tripled the victim services budget instead of spending money on a program that doesn't work. I've heard many of you in other contexts express interest in metrics and accountability. That if we have government programs that don't work and we're spending money on them, that we need to do something about that. We need to get rid of them. The sheet that's the last page of your handout that that our public defender referenced has the 10 cases of this last decade, and it shows that the total cost was for those 10 cases, just for defense costs, was $4,374,000.
Wrap it up, please.
It doesn't include the fact, it doesn't include county attorney expenses, it doesn't include attorney general's expenses, it doesn't include the expenses that were internal to the public defender's budget. So it's actually much higher. And one of the reasons is because as soon as there's a homicide arrest, they go into capital case mode, even though most of these cases, at some point early on, the death penalty is not pursued. We heard that it's $2.1 million is the approximate cost to take a case to trial. You can't predict how many new cases we're going to have, and that's just a trial. Then there's appeals and post-conviction and everything else. So I want to just touch on the testimony of Mr. Laszlovsky.
Representative,
Yes.
your timer went off. I asked you to close it up. Do you want me to gavel it closed without you closing? Or would you like to hurry it up?
I'll do my best to hurry it up. Members of the committee, I spent the better part of 20 years doing these cases. I can tell you that it's not reserved for the worst of the worst. Never is. I can tell you that it's a waste of money. I can tell you that there are innocent people caught in it. And I can tell you that it's all arbitrary and has no deterrent effect whatsoever. Anyone involved in the work knows that to be the fact. I urge a due pass. Thank you, Mr. Chair.